Greece. The name alone conjures images of turquoise seas and whitewashed houses glowing in the sun. Tourists step off planes expecting paradise, and for a few weeks that's exactly what they get. But beneath the postcard-perfect surface lies a very different Greece, one that its own citizens are struggling to live in. In the capital, Athens, families who've been there for generations are watching their neighborhoods vanish. Apartments that once echoed with the sound of kids playing are now sleek Airbnb rentals booked months in advance. Small family cafés that once served locals for decades have been replaced by trendy brunch spots catering to visitors. The people who once built the Greek experience now can't afford to live in it. A city that once felt like home has turned into a revolving door of tourists and investors. Some say it's the economy. Others say tourism saved Greece after years of crisis. Politicians blame global trends, and landlords blame opportunity. But the truth runs deeper than any single answer. Greece's crisis isn't new. It's the result of decades of financial mismanagement, unchecked corruption, and decisions that slowly traded livability for profit. What's falling apart now began long before the first influencer stepped foot in Santorini. Scroll through social media and you'll see the fantasy. Endless blue water, golden sunsets, and luxury yachts drifting between islands. Greece looks flawless, peaceful, even effortless. But for the people who actually call it home, it's a story of shrinking paychecks and impossible costs. A simple one-bedroom apartment in Athens now costs as much as the average monthly income. Rent eats half a person's wage before the month even begins. By the time electricity, fuel, and groceries are paid for, many residents are left wondering how to make it to the next paycheck. Some move back in with parents, others share cramped apartments with strangers. Teachers, nurses, and office workers, people once considered the backbone of the middle class, now juggle 2 or even 3 jobs just to get by. Locals call it the silent crisis, because while tourists marvel at the Acropolis, locals are calculating whether they can still afford to buy milk, pay their water bill, or renew the lease on their home. The birthplace of democracy is fighting a new battle, not for freedom or borders, but for survival. So how did one of Europe's most beloved countries fall into a trap of its own making? To answer that, you have to go back. Decades before the bailouts and the Airbnbs, to when Greece's dream of prosperity first began. After the dictatorship ended in 1974, Greece wanted to prove it belonged among Europe's modern democracies. The new government promised freedom and progress. It built highways, hospitals, and government offices. Young people found stable jobs. For the first time in generations, it felt like the good times had arrived. But prosperity came with a hidden price. Much of it was paid for with borrowed money. Every administration spent beyond its means, funding expansion with loans instead of income. At the same time, the powerful learned how to avoid paying their share. Tax evasion wasn't just common, it was expected. The result was a country that looked rich on paper, but was quietly sinking into debt. By the late 1990s, Greece's debt was enormous. Then came the Eurozone, and with it, easy access to foreign credit. Suddenly, the illusion of wealth looked real again. Interest rates were low, banks were generous, and investors poured money into everything from real estate to public projects. It was a golden age built entirely on borrowed air. For a moment, it felt like Greece was unstoppable. But beneath that shining optimism was a system primed to collapse. All it needed was one crisis strong enough to snap the illusion. That crisis came in 2008. When global markets crashed, Greece's entire financial facade fell apart. Investors fled, banks froze, and the government ran out of options. Because Greece no longer controlled its own currency, it couldn't print money to protect itself. By 2010, the country was bankrupt. The EU and IMF stepped in with a $110 billion bailout. But help came with brutal demands. Pensions were slashed, taxes skyrocketed, and hundreds of thousands of workers lost their jobs. Overnight, people who had built steady lives fell into poverty. Shops closed, hospitals ran out of supplies. Some families lost everything they had worked for. The unemployment rate exploded, 27% nationwide, 60% among the youth. For young Greeks, degrees meant nothing. Engineers delivered food, teachers waited tables, doctors emigrated. Hope vanished almost as quickly as the money. As part of the bailout terms, Greece sold what it owned. The historic port of Piraeus went to a Chinese conglomerate. 14 regional airports, including the gateways to Mykonos and Santorini, were leased to a German corporation for decades. Even the nation's power grid and water systems partially changed hands. For many citizens, it felt like their country was being sold piece by piece. By the time the smoke cleared, Greece had stabilized just enough to survive, but at the cost of its self-respect. The birthplace of Western democracy now felt like it was renting its own sovereignty. So when there was nothing left to sell, Greece turned to the one thing it could still offer: its beauty. Tourism became the lifeline. The islands shimmered in glossy posters again. Airlines launched new routes, and the world fell in love with Greece all over. From 15 million visitors in 2010 to more than 40 million by 2024, the numbers skyrocketed. At first, it was hailed as a miracle, the proof that Greece had finally recovered. But underneath the celebration, another trap was forming. Most tourism jobs were short-term and low-paying. A waiter could work 12-hour shifts all summer just to face unemployment all winter. Locals who tried to rent apartments found them disappearing from listings, replaced by short-term stays for tourists. For property owners, the math was simple. 1 week of Airbnb income equaled a month of local rent. Soon, entire neighborhoods were gutted. Streets once filled with bakers, barbers, and bookshops turned into rows of rental flats and cocktail bars. School enrollment dropped because families were forced to move away. The same economy that brought visitors was slowly pushing residents out. The paradox was painful. Tourism kept Greece alive while making it harder for Greeks to live at all. And just when the market seemed stretched to its limits, the government introduced another policy, one that would push housing completely out of reach. In 2013, Greece opened the door to wealthy foreigners with a new incentive: invest $250,000 in property and earn a 5-year residency visa. It was meant to attract capital after years of austerity, but it backfired almost immediately. Instead of helping locals, it invited investors to buy properties not as homes, but as assets. Buyers from China, the Middle East, and Europe snatched up apartments and entire buildings. Out of more than 16,000 properties purchased under the scheme, roughly 94% weren't lived in. They were flipped into short-term rentals or left empty as investments. The rental income flowed overseas. Meanwhile, Greeks spent more than half their wages just to keep a roof over their heads. Property prices doubled in central Athens within years. Locals couldn't compete with cash-rich buyers who saw Greek homes not as family spaces, but as profit machines. For foreigners, Greece became a luxury bargain. For Greeks, it became unreachable. By 2024, the government raised the minimum investment threshold to $500,000 in high-demand areas. But it was a bandage on a wound that had already bled too much. A generation of young professionals began packing their bags. If they couldn't build a life in Greece, they'd build one somewhere else. Since the crisis, more than 500,000 Greeks, nearly 5% of the population, have left the country. Most are under 35, highly educated, and tired of surviving instead of living. Doctors treat patients in London, engineers design skyscrapers in Dubai, and Greece's best minds are scattered across Europe, fueling other nations' progress. The loss isn't just economic, it's emotional. Empty classrooms, closed maternity wards, and quiet villages tell the story of a shrinking nation. The population is aging fast. By mid-century, 1 in 3 Greeks will be over 65. The birth rate sits near 1.3 children per woman, one of the lowest in the world. Couples are delaying families or giving up on them altogether because rent consumes everything they earn. Every family knows someone who has left. Parents wave goodbye at the airport, unsure if their children will ever return. Cafés that once echoed with laughter now survive on old regulars. The exodus has hollowed out the country's heart, not through war or disaster, but through exhaustion. And through it all, one uncomfortable truth lingers. The suffering of ordinary Greeks wasn't an unavoidable tragedy. For a small group, it was an opportunity. When Greece began privatizing its assets to pay off debt, the same politically connected elites who helped create the crisis stood at the front of the line. They partnered with foreign investors to acquire ports, utilities, and infrastructure for a fraction of their value. The profits were enormous. Costs of construction tripled compared to other European countries, while wages remained among the lowest. As ordinary citizens tightened their belts, the wealthy quietly expanded theirs. What was sold as national recovery became a blueprint for inequality. Greece wasn't rebuilding, it was being resold. The wealth of a few grew from the struggles of millions. The state offered austerity, the rich found opportunity, and the dream of equality faded further away. Today, the divide is impossible to ignore. In central Athens, boutique hotels charge $400 a night, more than a teacher earns in a week. Locals move farther out each year, replaced by short-term guests who come for the photos and leave before seeing the cracks. Gleaming apartments sit empty 9 months of the year while families squeeze into shared rooms on the city's edge. And yet, amid the frustration, there's still a quiet pride. Greeks haven't lost their resilience, just their patience. They've survived dictatorships, recessions, and austerity before, but this time feels different. This time, it's the soul of the country that's at stake. Greece remains one of the most beautiful places on Earth, but beauty can hide pain. The question now isn't whether Greece can recover financially, it's whether its people can ever reclaim the country they built. Because if the current path continues, paradise will belong only to those who can afford to rent it, and not to the people who call it home.